Thank you for joining this month's Instant Insight webinar. Today's webinar wraps up our summer series focusing on all things data center. Today, Chad Fraser and David Lover are back, and they will be focusing on all things data center security. With that said, Dave, I will hand the line over to you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Kelly. Appreciate it. This has been a fun summer, and it's cool because, hey, we've finished, and at the same time, I'm sad because it's kind of marking the end of summer. A lot of our audience probably has family that is headed off to school already, so it's a sad time, but it's actually it's good. And I've got Chad Fraser with me, as always, Vice President of Emerging Markets. Chad focuses in our data center Center of Excellence, and so he lives and breathes this stuff more than probably anybody within our organization. So Chad, welcome, and thanks for joining.
Well, thanks for the warm welcome, Dave, and I'm also excited. I, on the other hand, am more excited about the end of summer because it's near the end of this brutal heat and a cool off, so definitely right there with you.
I was going to say, with you in Texas and me in Minnesota, we have very different different climate preferences, I think.
Yeah, I think we got both ends of the scale, but I think we're, this is really, I like the way this series has developed, and today, we're going to wrap it up with security. I've always, and I think you've probably heard me say this on more than one occasion, I kind of look at security as the wrapper that goes around the solution set, right? You can put a bunch of neat stuff together, but if you don't lock the doors and close the windows and all that kind of stuff, then, unintended stuff happens. So I think this will be a good session for us to really kind of wrap all this stuff up together.
So let's start by revisiting this idea of the various platforms that we have, right? And the first platform, second platform, and we've talked about this throughout the entire summer, and how not only mobility fits into these items, but as networking and networked applications have changed over time, security becomes a big play here, right?
It does, and we've talked a lot about third platform because more and more that is the the go-to model for deploying and new technology where you see it, and not only mobile, but if you look at social, I mean certainly in the strictest sense and in the general sense, voice is social. So we've talked a lot, in the first series around cloud. Cloud's a lot about infrastructure. We've talked, fairly extensively about, one aspect of social, the mobile piece of it, and then, really the only part we haven't touched a lot on is the big data analytics, but we can leave that for another time and another discussion. One of the things that I think is very interesting and is that, early on, I think you and I had a little dialogue around what should and shouldn't be included in third platform. Things up in the fourth platform that should be pulled in, like sensors and IoT and machine intelligence, because some of that is, a reality today. So I came across, a revamped third platform model from IDC, which it shows exactly that. It shows your 4 pillars of the third platform: cloud, big data analytics, social, and mobility, and then it shows all these innovation accelerators, right front and center. Look at next-gen security, right? That is a part of this whole third platform. So it's not that it wasn't, it was always on the periphery, but that and, Internet of Things, IoT, have been brought to the forefront. So I think that's interesting. It's just how quickly things change, and the model for third platform is not fully set. It's kind of been in progress a few years, and it's already morphing.
Well, from the very beginning of all of this, we know that security is a big topic, and thinking traditionally at the when typical data people think of security, they think of firewalls, right? And firewalls are often viewed by the application people as being that pain in the butt device that is stopping flow, right? But we're finding that as applications are becoming more complicated, and this level of connectedness is certainly huge, right? I mean, I'm expected to be able to have devices anywhere in the universe be able to connect into my servers, my applications, and secure that connectivity. But we start really talking about how many areas of security there are, right? It's not just about the network. It's not just about firewalls. What do you, I love you, I love that. Yeah, in fact, you have a threat detected that's been blocked in quarantine.
Always vigilant.
Yeah. But, how do you quantify that? How do you, when you look at all of the areas that we need to think about in terms of security, how do you look at that?
Well, I borrowed a slide from IBM, and certainly they're in as much in the middle of security as anyone, because they've kind of been a traditional first and second platform provider, and they have SIMs and things like that, like QRadar. And I like the way they frame this up, because what it shows you is that there are various layers of security, and really, again, security, when we think about it, we think about cyber security, which really implies, if you look at that layer second from the bottom, is the network, server, and endpoint. But if we want to take it from top down, one of the easiest penetration points, if you want to look at it from a social or identity perspective, is just the old hack, someone calling up someone on telephone, masquerading as an IT support person, getting their passwords, and then they're in, right? And I know that that is something, or somebody leaves their password on a Post-it note stuck to their monitor. Things like that that are very casual are often the way that folks get in. We're not going to focus on that today. There's a whole discipline around compliance and assessments and really operationally, procedurally how you do things, but that is a very important one to understand, because that is generally, if you go to the white hat hacker conventions, those are one of the exercises. They'll be tasked with going in and dial for dollars, and they'll get a certain amount of time to go penetrate some enterprise by this whole masquerade. So it's something that's overlooked, but it's part of the security, certainly part of the security picture. The data and information really talks about encryption. Application and process is very important, and I'm going to lean on you as the subject matter expert for that, because you have a lot of experience. And then, of course, we can't overlook physical infrastructure. If you let folks into secured environments and let them basically have a free-handed things, then they can, through a number of discovery methods, get in and really start to peel out some proprietary information. And then, last but certainly not least, we're going to talk, fairly extensively about kind of the network, server, endpoint layer there. So it's a complex framework, but it encompasses almost everything in what we do today in business.
Well, I look at this framework and I think of it, in these different layers and how we've traditionally thought of it, and very specifically to your point, I have strong opinions, right? When you go from that second layer at the bottom, network, server, and endpoint, all the way up to the application and process, and you start thinking that, securing the endpoint is not nearly as important as securing the application. And if you doubt that, think about, I think of the trends with VPN, right? Everybody in the universe wants to use VPN, and they want to think that, that is the best way to let my remote workers, my remote home office workers, securely gain access to my infrastructure. And think about if, as a consumer, if you took that same philosophy when you had to deal with buying something on Amazon.com, right? That I've got to launch my VPN so I can get to my secure account so I can buy whatever. I mean, it's a ridiculous concept. And so you end up having to, that very top one of people and identity, it becomes critically important in combination with securing the actual applications. So it is such a holistic thing, and I just look at this and I look at where network security used to be and just security in general and where it is, and I just can't help but thinking it's gotten in a way more complex, in a way it's gotten easier, actually, believe it or not, but there's no doubt that it has changed.
Oh yeah, absolutely it's changed. In fact, if we want to look at it at a very high level, we can talk about or characterize some of those changes. You know, and you know, kind of the point that we made earlier on third platform and its definition. I would imagine by the time this slide is presented, these numbers have changed. You know, there's 3.2 billion internet users. There's 1.3 billion smartphones, and you know, smartphones are, as we know, in the emerging markets, in those countries that don't have infrastructure, that's their go-to communication device. So that's only going to proliferate more. 3 billion new devices through 2020. IoT is here. You know, we've talked about, you know, smart refrigerators, smart appliances, your lights. You know, everything is connected to the internet. So it is it's really the scale and the magnitude of the change is astounding. 10,000-fold increase in cyber threats. You know, anybody can go out with a port scanner and start scanning and look for devices and start, you know, first thing they're going to do, let me try admin. You know, they hack in. I think there was some IoT pilot where somebody put something out there, had not changed the default credentials, and within moments it had been hacked because people are continually looking for that. And then the other thing is the move to, you know, cloud, the adoption of cloud. It's been very powerful. You know, you look at just the reach from B2C to the consumers, more of that's moving to the cloud, and enterprises are doing the same thing for a number of reasons, which we talked in some length in the first session, but it is huge and it's getting bigger. So this tells you that not only has the nature of the nature of how you protect in terms of the number of vulnerabilities, but just the way you have to do it is different. So it is a much different picture today than it was a year ago, as it will be a year hence from today. So, you know, I'd like to take maybe another way to look at this and look at the cost of cybercrime. We've heard about the Bitcoin, you know, the being held hostage for Bitcoin, all those kinds of things, but the number of dollars, millions of dollars per incident, has escalated significantly year over year, and that'll continue, right? Because information is so important, and there's so much liability associated with it. I happen to be privileged or not privileged, depending on how you look at it, to be able to review a lot of security addendums and questionnaires that customers want, you know, us to engage in, and it is astounding. They used to be very simple, and now they're really complex, and it really covers a lot. You know, one of the kind of unknown things around, you know, the Sony breach was they spend $22 million per year on security, and their direct cost for 1 year was $35 million, and the cost of the reputation, $100 billion. That seems like a pretty good return on investment if it did the job, right? So I think those are things that really kind of bring it home that, you know, the risks, and again, we're kind of focusing on cybersecurity and network, but we have to kind of consider all those other things in there. One of the points that I like that you really made about VPN is that's great. VPN keeps, you know, access, you know, network access, the people that are not authorized out, but what if your endpoint, your PC has already been compromised? Hey, you've got a door in. So all of those things have to really be considered and taken together comprehensively to have a sound approach and framework for good security.
Well, I think when you look at that idea of you know, the applications, again, I keep going back to that, and within the world of communications, and you know, whether you're talking about a smartphone app like maybe a Via Communicator or, you know, any of those, they almost seem at odds with what the role of security is, right? There's this contention between the two where one says let's be connected and the other says let's not allow access. And I just remember the good old days when, you know, all you had to do to hack somebody was to gain access to their building, right? Physically walk in, and that was it. It was and it was all about a firewall, you know, with remote, you know, simple, single point entry, and that just doesn't exist anymore.
Oh, yeah, you couldn't be more right. In fact, now what we like to call it is really a borderless attack surface, right? There you've got all of your assets inside this circle: campus, branch office, data center, remote office, that you kind of think of in an insulated fashion, right? But the reality is you've got people, you've got devices, you've got remote workers, you've got SaaS solutions, cloud, internet. You have a ton of stuff. So there's more ways in and more ways out. And that's another, I think, a bit of a misnomer. When you do a penetration test, you do a penetration, I think most people think of penetrating outside in, but you also need to look inside out. So I like this graphic because it does illustrate the fact that the world has changed. It's not, okay, if I can get in this door, I'm in. There are so many ways in and so many ways out that you have to be vigilant about, that if you don't do that, you're fooling yourself.
So how has that changed over time then?
Well, it's changed significantly. If you look at, evolution of protecting the enterprise, initially you put a firewall up, you have a limited number of access points, you put a firewall up, and people had a set it and forget it type mentality, right? Okay, I'm protected. But as we have changed and evolved, and for all the right reasons and good outcomes, we've moved things into data center, we've put things out in the cloud. You have to change your mindset, because there's advanced protection that's above and beyond firewall, and it's almost passé to hear anybody say, hey, I need a firewall. So the advanced protection that lays on top of that really deals with all of the changes in the environment. And then if you want to really take it out one step further and give a little love to one of our partners, Fortinet here, there's this whole concept of global intelligence and services, that worldwide there needs to be some affiliation or consolidation, aggregation of what's happening in all theaters to all those customers, and bringing it into a central database so that signatures and heuristics, all those things can be updated and kept in. As you learn something in some place, it has to be propagated out, really almost worldwide, or otherwise, okay, you've locked this door, but you didn't lock the back door. So those, mobile security, application control, and of course antivirus intrusion prevention, all those kinds of things. But we're starting to really do more around behavioral, what websites should people hit, viruses, websites, what apps do you want in, the doors in and out is very complicated, and all of that has to be coordinated very cleanly, because if you don't, then all you got to leave is one hole and somebody's in, and you're none the wiser. So that's really a fundamental change in how we used to approach security to how we approach it today.
So you mentioned Fortinet, and as the guy who works with you and sees a lot of this, you talk a lot about Fortinet. What's the big deal with them? Why do you like them? And maybe what's different about them? Is it an ease of administration, or is it just that holistic solution? What's the deal with them?
Well, there's a lot of things I like about them, and they are a market leader in terms of the concept of unified threat management. This slide really kind of illustrates that very well. If you look on the left and you look at all these point solutions, firewall, VPN, app control, IPS, IDS, web filtering, all the way down, and you deploy point solutions, then that is a management nightmare. You have to have subject matter expertise across across all those point solutions. You have to really, quite honestly, you have to have a large resource pool to manage them. It's very complicated, and the unified threat management, the whole concept there is you have a single management console and one platform that spans all that stuff. So you can You can deploy or turn on features as you need. If you don't need, antivirus or anti-malware, those kinds of things, then you don't turn them on, right? And you can really kind of target what your needs are, but you do it all within the context of one package and one solution set. So it allows you to, respond faster, be more crisp, and really do it in a more efficient manner. So that's really one of the things I think that we have identified with Fortinet, that they're, they are the Gartner Magic Quadrant leader there, and you see other suppliers or OEMs following suit there. So I think, one more graphic I'd like to kind of maybe that sums that up is to show where, we have a holistic approach to it. So the whole attack surface, if you think back to that borderless attack surface that we had before, that's a lot to get your arms around. So if you look at kind of the middle arrow there being that attack surface, and the FortiGate being kind of the appliance that sits out there and does its magic across all those point solutions. And then on the top, the threat intelligence and service being that, almost, I would say, data analytics, right? You're taking a lot of, we said we're not going to talk about big data analytics, but here we are talking about it. It's taking all that information in, not only from that particular enterprise, but enterprises across the globe, and learning that and propagating those lessons and the security precautions out to all of those different points out in the world, in the World Wide Web or the Internet, as you want to think of it. It's just very powerful, because it really brings everything together, and it makes something very complicated, where it's easy to miss things, much simpler to administer, and be assured that you are protecting your enterprise the way that you think you are. So, I know we've talked a lot about network security, and I know we didn't. One area I want to really understand is more around, kind of the application user perspective, because to your point, a lot of times the traditional network security and those applications and, end user kind of things are at odds. So do you have any examples of kind of what you encountered, and maybe enlighten us a little bit on what you've seen with respect to that, Dave?
Yeah, and kind of hitting on what I mentioned earlier about how in the old days everything was viewed as, well, let's launch a VPN, and when you think about it, at a client level, at a user level, a VPN really is a big old Band-Aid. And it's really because you don't have secure applications, you don't necessarily trust your users, which at some point VPNs don't help there either, but it's this way to say, well, I'm going to encrypt the traffic only when you want to go over this particular link or tunnel back to the main location. And you hit it on the head when you said, God, all I have to do is compromise the computer and I get this beautifully encrypted tunnel to go all the way back in. And the problem I fundamentally have with it is, especially when you go to communicate, and I admit I take a user approach to this, an application approach, and not so much of a network, but you have to let your end users use their applications without having to think about it beforehand. If we were to go say, well, I'm going to make you launch a VPN before you can make a phone call, or you have to launch your VPN before you can receive a phone call because you somehow magically know when you're going to receive a phone call. I mean, the concept is just ridiculous. And
it is.
I think, right, and Apple kind of led the way by making the user the center point of all this, and letting, not making them think about technology in order to be competent with the technology. And so, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, the thing that obviously places a burden on knowing that the user is who they think they are, right? So how do you know somebody is who they say they are without going through all that rigmarole to say, okay, before I want to use this, I got to do this and do that. How does that work?
Yeah, well, so there ultimately comes down to a security certificate. Think of it as like an identification of who I am, and so actually security certificates actually play two different roles. One of it is to ensure identity, and it's usually done at a server level, right? When I go to mybank.com, I want to know, am I really talking to who I think I'm talking to, or did somebody spoof the DNS records and it's actually resolving to a different IP address? Well, the beauty with a security certificate is it'll tell you that, hey, you think you're going to this place, but you're not actually going to this place because the certificate doesn't match. But then the second part of a security certificate is all about the encryption of the data. So again, it's twofold. Who am I? And okay, now that I am who I say I am, let's make sure to encrypt our traffic. And you hear that in terms of, like, a lot of people talk about it as SSL, right? When you go to an SSL-based website of https://mybank.com. And the reality is we've kind of evolved from SSL to ultimately TLS. Like I said, people still call it SSL, and that's fine. But like in that first kind of bullet, we talk about the transition that we've made from SSL to 2.0, 3.0, and then TLS 1.0, 1.1, and we're currently at 1.2. And I think where this becomes really important is when you start thinking from a telephony perspective, right? When I'm looking at it, and I look at this as something that the rest of your IT organization has been living for ever and ever and ever and ever, right? 13 million years in the making of
Right.
of ensuring that everything has the right security certificates. But in the world of telephony, there are very few telecom departments who have a clue what a security certificate is, and some of the manufacturers, specifically Avaya, have not helped that. Actually, they did help by allowing you to be oblivious to it, where they just included some kind of generic certificates behind the scenes. So the encryption part of it was being taken care of. You won't be able to see the data in the process, but it really it did not go to that uniqueness that we had talked about of true identity. And anybody on the call who's lived in the communications world knows that if you go to your system manager server, even the communication manager web conferencing, you immediately get an error message that says, hey, this doesn't appear to be who you say it is. And we say, fine, I know what I'm doing, skip this. And then at least then after that we encrypt the data. But the certs that Avaya had been lending everyone are the old certs, right? If you have to be living under a rock not to have heard of the whole SHA-1 and SHA-2 thing going on. Most, I should say in the old days, the browsers, and by the way, the old days is literally like, what, 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, the browsers would say, hey, you're going to a website that is encrypted or identified by an old, weaker certificate, and we call that a SHA-1 cert. And they're saying that not only does it not meet NIST requirements of the National Institute of Standards and Technology, they come through and kind of define where people should be security-wise, among other things. But NIST is saying, no, you have to go to SHA-2, which is at least a 2048-bit encryption key. And so Avaya is using this as an opportunity to say, hey, rather than us continuing this path of just letting you use our certificate, we have to upgrade these anyway. How about you just start using your own and generate it by your certificate authority? And that is absolutely positively what needs to happen, but I am finding more and more telecommunications customers, they're like, who, what do I have to do now? And this gets scary to some degree because you find out very quickly that if you let a certificate expire, things stop communicating. And from a communications perspective, if you're not paying attention to an expiring certificate, your application will just stop to function. You will stop receiving phone calls.
Definitely a service-impacting event there.
It is a career-limiting adventure, is what I sometimes like to call that. And so and the good news is, again, it's not like a new concept. It's not a new technology. This has been millions of years in the making with IT, but it's really just an education that needs to happen. So I kind of thought I could use this as a platform almost to provide a little sneak preview, because we've just come up with our next topic in this series. Actually, it's not. We're done with this series, but we're going to start up our regular non-summer routine with different topics, and I'm going to kick it off in September, doing one on Avaya's use of security certificates. But I thought maybe we'd talk a little bit about it because it is such an important deal. So if that's okay with you.
Yeah, you bet. I want to just play back, because I think this is really important, where we talked about the analogy of the VPN. So the purpose of the certificate being that on both ends of the communication, you are who you say you are, right? Because you need a security as a user and as wherever that server lives, if we want to talk about, more of a second platform arrangement, and then actually encrypting that data within, so for while it's being transmitted, that it's secure in the event that you have some breach of that that transport layer that you're covered there. I think that's really cool, because it kind of covers the whole transaction user into the application. Do I have that right?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think you bring up a really good point when you talk about the identification, and how a lot of times the certificate is only put on the server, and the client just comes in and they see the certificate, they're told how to encrypt it, and everything is good, but it's still a lot of times required. If I want to know who that client is, I have to have them log in, and that's very much the traditional approach to this, right? You log into something. But as you pointed out earlier with IoT, how are you going to log into a temperature sensor? That just sounds dumb, right? And the biggest topic comes up is, how do we start securing IoT? And Chad, you know me. I've been living IoT way before it was cool.
Yes, exactly.
I have a garage door opener that is very connected with the rest of the world. I can open and close it from anywhere in the world. I get an alert if my kids leave the garage door open after 9 p.m. And this happens with almost every device in my house. So
I would expect nothing less, tied, I'm sure, tightly into IFT.
Yeah, exactly. One of my favorite things on the planet, IFTTT.com. Boy, if you guys aren't using IFT, you totally have to. It's
You're
fantastic.
missing the boat for sure.
You are missing out on some cool things. Yeah, so I always talk about my favorite IFT recipe that I have is I think I recognize a number of names on the attendance list, and they know I'm born and raised in Green Bay. I'm a Packer fan, and I have it set so that when ESPN.com tells IFT that the Green Bay Packers scored a touchdown, I have IFT tell my light bulbs in my house to flash green and gold. So
Oh, that's great.
these are all interconnected concepts that Dave Lover, would have no clue how to actually program, but IFT does it all for me.
It's always
so
nice
awesome.
to have an assistant. Well,
Exactly.
It's always good to put a kind of a practical application around it. I mean, and I'm the same way. I think you actually were the one who turned me on to the whole hue light scene, so I've got them, spread everywhere and doing all kinds of goofy stuff with them as well. So I can definitely relate to the IoT being part of our everyday life.
Yeah.
So now,
I think because of that, right, you instead of having to log into each and every one of those devices, security certificates as an identity can play there as well. And we've even been doing that on the telephony side, right? With 802.1x is a very common standard that allows me to put a client-side security certificate and saying, this is how I want to identify you as a trusted device, not just a trusted user. So it absolutely can go both ways in terms of that identity.
Yeah, just kind of an auto authentication, if you will.
Yeah. Yep.
So I'd like to understand a little bit more about, the TLS security certificates and identity certificates. Can you maybe spend a little more time kind of delving into that so everybody understands how that, how that mechanism works and, some of the moving parts that are involved?
Yeah, no, and it's a really important piece because when people think of certificates, I think of it as a piece of paper. I think of it as my driver's license, right? And I can look at my driver's license and it proves that I am who I say I am. But the first trick is you, Chad Frazier, have to be told that you can trust whoever gave me my driver's license. Right? Like if I go to Photoshop and come up with my own cool design and it's not authorized by any state in our country and it's authorized by the state of Dave Lover, you're gonna be like, yeah, cute little driver's license, dude, but I'm not following that, and I'm certainly not going to give you any money, right? So, and this is where we have, in addition to a certificate, we have a certificate authority, and that authority is the one that's doing a lot of that. But the first part is to know that, again, it's two pieces. It's the actual identity certificate, and then there's a second component to it that, oh, by the way, is also a certificate. But I think of that as my, if you've ever gone to have something signed, right? To prove that you signed it, you want to have somebody witness it. And the witness has, we call that witness a notary public, right? And they have this magical stamp, and they put their signature on it, and you can almost think of them as that trusted certificate authority. And then I think the other thing to know is that you don't, unlike a notary public, you don't always have to go to a commercial or a third-party cert or a public cert, because the reality, just like a notary public, they don't do it for free. If you want something that is automatically trusted by the rest of the universe, you're going to have to pay for that. And I think that's important to either know. And sometimes I've seen security certificates be maybe as low as $100 or as high as, the worst I've heard is maybe $300. But if you think about how many devices you have that might each need a certificate, the last thing I want to do is pay for each and every one of them. Especially when I'm not expecting anyone in the general public to trust it. I only need my own internal business to trust it. And so that's where this idea of an enterprise scoped cert comes in, right? Where I think of it in the same way as a DID extension versus a non-DID extension. A DID extension is routable in the public switch telephone network. A non-DID extension is only routable within your own cute little network. And it's so similar concepts, and it's just all about the scope of trust and who trusts it, who doesn't. And the other cool part is I can tell someone how to trust or who to trust by giving those devices a copy of that certificate authority's trust cert. And on the next slide kind of talks about a little bit more of that idea, of the certificate authority.
So the enterprise certificate is really used for, probably for applications or things that are not going to be exposed to the public domain, and you're going to use the commercial route if you're going to be more exposed to kind of the public domain. Is that a good way to look at it?
Big time, and I think of it very similar to, if I bring it back to the Avaya world, there's a lot of things that are happening behind the scenes that you as an individual or you as a user just don't even have to care about. You don't care how voicemail encrypts its traffic to, I'll call it session manager. It's behind the scenes, and so I don't have to have my grandma's computer trust Aura messaging. I just have to have the individual internal things do it. But when you go to like a third-party public device, like maybe an iPhone that exists, easily not only inside the network but outside the network, I have to now decide, well, do I want to be the one pushing my own personal private certificate to that iPhone, or do I want to just say, hey, Mr. iPhone, you already, as part of iOS 9, you already know about semantic VeriSign, GoDaddy. That's part of the updates that you get is those big, huge certificate authorities work with all the operating system manufacturers and say, hey, load this in there. So the beauty is most devices, that are common, from Windows to Apple, iOS, and Android, and Linux, when those manufacturers create those operating systems, they preload the trust of some of these public certs. And so, I always think about the Avaya Communicator application that I load on an iPhone, and the last thing I want to do is make my end users have to think about, oh, quick, let's first download a certificate. No, I just want it to work and not make the end user think about it, and that's where I might choose to do a commercial or a third-party cert for those outside devices.
Makes sense. So with that said, let's talk a little bit more about that certificate authority and what that looks like, because that sounds like that you can sometimes work around that via the enterprise certificate, but certainly not something you can get away from entirely.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. And I think the certificate authority, as I mentioned here, you'll just see it referred to as a CA, but it's a certificate authority, and you could think of it as a person, you could think of it as an identity. The reality is it's a server, and it's a particular server's job to sign, literally put their digital signature on somebody's certificate to say, yeah, you can trust it. Because you trust me, you need to trust everything that I trust. And so the certificate authority is responsible for that task. And in theory, it's certainly with the public certificate authorities, like I mentioned earlier, the VeriSigns, the Semantics, GoDaddy, etc. Their job is to not only, ultimately to verify and validate that identity. So when I submit, usually it's called a CSR, right? A certificate signing request. Think of it as a form that I fill out that maybe I'll put my desired encryption key on it. I'll send it up to the certificate authority. They'll look at it, check it out, make sure it matches up with what they believe to be true. They say, yes, I trust you. I'm going to sign it, and then I'm going to send it back to you. So that's where kind of the whole the validation process and that digital signature that goes on it. You should also know that there's a term that shows up all the time called a CRL. And a CRL stands for a certificate revocation list. And what that really is saying is, hey, I signed this certificate before, and because I trusted them when I signed it, but I want you to know I don't trust them anymore. So it's a big list of certificates that I no longer trust, and it's kind of expected that all of the devices and servers that are out there subscribe to a certificate authority's CRL. And so it'll often ask, you see this all the time, even in Session Manager, there's a place where you can download the current CRL and find out, okay, who am I not supposed to trust anymore that I was originally told I should trust? And so it comes up all the time, and sometimes it's part of the validation. If you haven't gotten a CRL in a while, they say, yeah, because you haven't updated your CRL, we no longer trust you and trust your stuff. But it just depends on whether people are actually looking at that or not. But ultimately, it's really about how do I get an identity, who is going to verify that my identity is correct and valid, and how do I identify that trust? And like we said, it could happen at the server level, it could happen at the client level, and obviously once I get past the identification aspect of it, now it also is responsible for assisting me in the encryption of the data between those two things, the client and the server.
Very powerful stuff. So I think that I'm going to go ahead and throw out the dumb question today. With hearing about network breaches all the time, and locking down all the ins and outs and those types of things the best as we can, do we really have to worry about the Avaya system, the platform we deploy? Do we have to worry about that?
Yeah, we really do, and I think a lot of the Avaya customers on the call are recognizing, again, you'd have to be living under a rock to know or to not have heard about the fact that Avaya wants to officially end support of SHA-1 certificates on something like SAL, right, the Secure Access Link. It's the thing that
Wow.
if you have a PBX and it errors out or generates an alarm, the remote access for that is done via SAL. And it has been using a SHA-1 certificate. And the newer versions also should support the newer SHA-2 certificates, but Avaya is now saying literally as of the end of this year, they're going to deprecate the SHA-1, which is a good thing, right? It's
That's
good to support the SHA-2.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Because if you're not paying attention to that and you're not providing updates, same way, like Google Chrome, provided a browser update that says, yeah, we certainly support SHA-2, but we support SHA-1 as well. And last summer they ended support of SHA-1, so that browser can no longer even browse to a website using the old cert. Well, Avaya is doing the exact same thing, and so that's one aspect of, yes, you have to pay attention to it. But I also think there's this whole trend that's happening, right, with communications. And in the old days, it was all about devices, and there was a phone sitting on your desk, and it was really, you didn't have an end user, you had a phone. And you could say, well, yeah, that's my phone, and so that's my identity. And we're like, no, it doesn't have to be that way. And as unified communications kicks into gear, and more people are using it for collaboration and starting to use soft clients, and like Avaya's SIP endpoints support a thing called MDA, or multi-device access, meaning I as a human being can log into as up to 10 different physical devices. Yes, I need the security to happen, but I need the system to know that it's me, because it's not static, it's dynamic. Today I might be logged into this device, tomorrow I might be logged into that device, the day after that I might go to my grandma's house and log into her computer. And so this user approach becomes extremely critical to look at that. And it presents a pretty big problem for us, because in the old days, we had station pins, right? Station pins were kind of the way you did stuff, and a traditional telecom person would kind of try to help their end users think of this new cool IP or SIP phone as the same thing they had 30 years ago, with that phone sitting on the desk. And so to make life easier for them, because technically it was the IT guys or the telecom people that were logging those phones in, they would make really simple passwords. Sadly, they put things like 1234 as the user's password, or maybe they think they're really creative and it's unique, and I'm going to put the extension as the password, or maybe the extension 01 as the password. And it was all about making it easier for the administrator to log in everybody's phones for them. For one, that goes out the window when you start thinking about UC-based technologies and how they can get in and do that. But it also gets really, really scary when you start thinking about the tools that are available today. And I look at the traditional PIN that exists. Again, whether it's a 4-digit PIN, there are tools that exist that allow me to do up to 70 registration attempts per second. And so think about the math on that. If you have a 4-digit PIN like 1234, or picture worst case 9999, it's still only a total of 10,000 different combinations. And if you do the very easy math of taking 10,000 divided by 70 registration attempts per second, that means I can hack your 4-digit PIN in 142 seconds or less.
Wow, that's really fast.
It's crazy fast, right? And you think, oh, well, quick, let's double it to 8. Guys, it's still, if you give me unlimited time, I will hack it, and I can break an 8-digit PIN in 2.3 weeks. So there's a number of things that happen, but and I don't know if you've ever played with SipVicious, Chad. It's a cool little Python script that you can download. Just search for Python or SipVicious, and you'll find it. And it's a tool set. And my favorite one is SVCrack. because all it does is it's a little command line thing that I can run in Windows or in Linux, and I just say, hey, there's the registrar, the SIP registrar that I want to hack. You give it the IP address of Session Manager, and you say, I want to log in with this extension, and here's a dictionary file of all the passwords I want to try. And it just goes through every single one of them. And
wow.
yeah, and it's really, really scary because it's so easy, and I, Dave Lover, wouldn't have a clue how to hack into somebody's computer that fast, but I don't have to. All I have to know is how to issue the command line for svcrack, and I am absolutely going to get into the system.
That sounds like a playground for millennials to me.
It is. If you want to, if you want to play the role of a hacker, there's a lot of really cool tools out there that do it. And that's one of the things we do when we do penetration testing with customers, right? Is we use these tools because they're the same tools hackers use.
Well, I have to say, obviously I'm very steeped in kind of security from a network perspective and all that, but gosh, you're scaring the heck out of me. How would we possibly lock down this environment? What can you do to combat this? I mean, increasing the number of digits in your PIN and all that all, and I get the certificates and all that, but what can you really do to secure, a user account?
Yeah, there's actually some fairly common best practices. And what you have to be okay with is the fact that you need to do the same things that you are absolutely expected and no one questions it on the PC side, right on the personal computer side of, the rest of IT says, well, of course you're going to change your password every 90 days. Duh. And even though we don't like it, we do it. And we're like, yes, of course, I know I need to change my password. I'm mad, but I realize that I have to do it. And that it really comes down to this idea of that very first thing I talked about of you have to have a complicated password to start with, right? And what we are finding over time is that complex isn't nearly as important as long. And so, you find out very quickly that a lot of people, they go complex, they insert special characters, and they put a 3 instead of an E, and all of a sudden that becomes the new language, though. So you don't literally brute force every single combination. You look for trends. You look for people's birthdays, anniversaries, children's names, pets' names, and you do the standard substitution of, okay, anytime you see an E, put a 3. Anytime you see an I, put a 1. Anytime you see an O, put a 0. And all of a sudden, it limits it. So long passwords have actually become the better way to go. Because another thing, you mentioned it earlier on the call, if it's too complex of a password, you don't memorize it. You write it down. And that's the worst thing you can do, is to write it down, put it in a goofy web or a Word document that's not encrypted. And so really you need to start memorizing it. And phrases are easier to memorize than some complex eight-character goofiness. So long is better than complex. And don't get me wrong, complex from numbers are easy because there's only a very small handful of combinations. So numbers, characters, case sensitive, those are all really, really good things. But if you go under the assumption of any password is hackable, right? It's a matter of giving me enough time. If you give me all the time in the universe, I am going to hack your password. No matter how cool, no matter how complex, I've done everything Dave told me to do, I am going to hack into it. It's only a matter of time. So we do two other things. One, you turn on certain firewall capabilities that slow the hacker down. We call it rate limiting. And so Session Manager does exactly that. So when it's a good, fun thing to show people is that when I'm using SIP Vicious to hack into a Session Manager, I show how quick it happened, and then I turn on Session Manager's firewall with tuned settings, not just the default settings. I can say, well, Chad Frazier is got to be one of the coolest guys on the planet. He cannot dial 300 people in 30 seconds. he is not that cool. So
no.
We start recognizing those kinds of things and say, yeah, that doesn't work. That's that many attempts is not human in nature, and therefore we should either block that user or more realistically slow that user down so that it doesn't take 142 seconds to burn through 10,000 combinations. It'll take you 15 years. And then if you adopt that very last recommendation is don't give them 15 years. Change the stupid password. And while 15 years for a password sounds ridiculous, if I could poll the audience, I would say who in the audience has had the exact same voicemail password for the last 15 years? I bet every single hand would go up. There are things that if we're not forced to change it, we won't change it. And users are lazy, right? Me, Chad, we all are.
Yes.
And
yes.
if you don't make me do it, I'm not going to do it. And so that's part of the whole conversation that we do and make people do that. We actually created a tool. Chad, you were very instrumental in helping us craft a lot of the requirements in here as well. And we built an application we call it Password Pro that helps a user administer, change, comply with security policies all through a web browser. So I actually brought mine up here. My screen, when I go in, it'll say, I log in with my Active Directory credentials, and it says, oh, yeah, sure enough, we see who you are. Here's your extension. Here's the device type that you have. You should know that your communication profile password, which is typically used for SIP phones, expires in September 13th. Your security code, which is that 8-digit PIN that is on the station screen of Communication Manager, that expires in a few days. So you can notice that the color is even changed from blue to whatever that color is, tan, yellow, something like that. I can even force people to change their voicemail passwords, which we have not deployed internally, but I've got a number of customers who have said, we need to change voicemail passwords, and I don't have the staff to be able to manually do this for end users. Is there such a tool that can do this for us to enable our end users to be self-sufficient? And the answer is, heck yeah, it's called Password Pro. Yep. It's very, very, very cool.
That is way cool. I really like the way it's integrated into AD and, kind of within the fabric of what you do already. And I will say that, one of the things that strikes me, and I've always been a believer of this, people think that, we go back to the kind of that security framework, that because an application has a different function, that your best practices are different. And I think what we've really explored today is it's not, right? It's still the same types of things. You need to be very purposeful and you need to be very thoughtful and careful on how you do things, but it's really the same issues you wrestle with if it's collaboration/unified communication or data storage or all that. I mean, it's really kind of all the same concerns, and a similar approach is what really strikes me as we go through this conversation.
Yep, it is. So this kind of marks the end of our time together, Chad, this summer. And
gosh, Carol Burnett's song comes to mind.
But I think it was fun talking about data center. I love getting your perspective. You live it every single day with your team. You are doing all of these things, starting out with our first session was about virtualization. Our second session was, what was it, cloud? No, was that the first one? I've already forgotten the topic.
Networking. Yep.
Networking, thank you. Yep, and the evolution of networking that's happened. From the traditional layer 2, layer 3 to, almost kind of reversing them, thinking about layer 3 at the edge and layer 2 at the core, which is just a crazy cool concept.
It is. It is.
And finishing it up with security, and we wrap around with that. Any closing comments, that you have on the topics?
I think that what always strikes me is we put these sessions together to kind of get to a means to an end, and I like the way security is the wrapper. I mean, if you really look at it, you can talk about OSI model, you can talk about any of these layered or approaches. What we have explored is not only where we came from, but where we're going or are going down the third platform, and what are the fundamental changes. So, I think it's easy to get overwhelmed by, the terms and acronyms and those things, and what is virtualization and all that. But, they're at the end result is they are different, more efficient ways to do the same things we've always done. In terms of when you boil it down, we're still trying to achieve the same things. We're just going about it a different way, and I think that's what's impressed me more than anything is, okay, when we get into the discussion and all that, there is a view that data center and UC are different, because voice has always been kind of the application relegated to the IDF, MDF, the telco closet, right? And now that it is really out of the closet and making its presence more and more felt in the data center, it's definitely a very relevant conversation to pull this in, and I think that I'm going to compliment you that you've done a great job of really taking these somewhat obscure concepts and bringing them in from a practical perspective to relate them. So I've been really, at times I kind of scratch my head and say, that was not intended the way these things fell together, but there's just an organic flow to it that, I hope we've been able to communicate out to the audience that they are really kind of two sides of the coin, and we're talking about infrastructure that hosts applications that used to be on a single sole purpose server, in many cases that the OEM, you could only get from them an appliance, and it's changed. The world is changing to take advantage of these advances in technology, and it's all of these issues come right along with it. You just have to look at them through a different lens.
So Chad, the question that we did get, which I responded to already, is fantastic. It's have you guys considered being radio DJs, an early morning show on security trends, if you will? And I love that idea.
Yeah,
I think
I'll take that as a compliment.
Yeah, I think, right? Maybe not. No, we've actually, I would love everybody's feedback on this call. We've talked about doing a podcast of, like, with Chad, and there's a number of people that we could do. Include in on that, whether it's video or just these kind of conversations, casual every week. Internally I do a Tech Weekly live podcast, and certainly be interested in would you guys actually tune in to listen to Chad and I maybe they have, but
yeah, hopefully that wasn't too much tongue-in-cheek, but
yeah, right. Yeah, so good.
I've enjoyed it. I think I guess if nothing else, hopefully the sincerity of that, we do enjoy talking about these topics, and I love the exchange with you. I always do. I mean, we always kind of start from different ends and we end up in the middle, with a common understanding. So I really like that, and I'm glad that has kind of been shown through in the way our style. And hopefully it doesn't. I hate death by PowerPoint, so that's certainly another reason that I like this format. So hopefully everyone's enjoyed it.
So just one last closing remark. Again, we do these webinars every month, and so we have one. Our next one is scheduled for sometime in September. I don't know exactly what that was, but talking
September
about
22nd.
September 22nd. Thank you very much. And we're going to talk more about security certificates and very specifically around Avaya's use of them, and give you some examples of how to approach. Okay, I want to go from SHA-1 to SHA-2. What are some of the things that I need to think about, and do I go public? Do I go private certs? What do I do? So that'll be September 22nd. So we'd love to see you guys there. With that, Kelly, we're going to turn it back to you for the last time for our summer series.
Thank you. I hope everyone has a great day. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.